Shalom alaikum, Ms. Parker. I'm here today in order to share a little bit of information with you guys. Something that I found really interesting when I was sitting back and looking at particular videos and different things like of that nature. So then I came across this one particular one that was, it touched home, and it gave a lot of relevance or revelation to particular genealogies that's going throughout America and different places. So basically, we're going to go ahead and start here. I'm going to share my screen with you guys so you can see. I don't own the copyrights to the video or the images that's going to be submitted, and I don't own or historical genealogy the copyrights to the music, nor do I get agree with totally the person's perception or perspective. So basically, we just gonna go ahead and start it, so that we don't have to keep doing this. Here we go. All right, we're on the Reynolds Historical Genealogy Collection, and we're in the book Nicholas Martel, the adventurous Huguenot, the military engineer and the earliest American ancestor of George Washington, by John Byers Stout. This is from 1932. Nicholas Martel, Huguenot. Says here, to the names of Hampden, Ham, and Cromwell, Woodrow Wilson could well have added those of Calvin, Bessa, and Coligny, for there was a distinct French Huguenot strain in the lineage of George Washington. It came to him from his American ancestor, Nicholas Martel, a Huguenot refugee who came to Virginia in 1620. Remember, if you actually go check the etymology of refugee right now, you'll see that the first people being called refugees were Huguenots. We're going to see who the Huguenots are. Why am I reading this right now? This infusion of Huguenot blood, all right, Huguenot blood, into the Washington family, Huguenot blood, into the Washington family is a special interest both to historians and to psychologists. Each of these learned groups appears to agree that in this blending of the Cavalier and of the Huguenot, there is a definitely revealed a physical basis as well as a spiritual background for the extraordinary personage and character of Washington. All right. So what? He's a Huguenot, pretty male. So what? All right. Well, so most of my followers know already where I'm going with this. In case you don't know, it says here, History of the Conquest of Spain by the Arab Moors, with a sketch of the civilization which they achieved and imparted to Europe by Henry Copey in 2 volumes. This is from 1892, page 445. They're talking about Columbus and his voyage and how his ship, his vessel, was fitted out in that little port of Palos, which had lately been a Moorish port. His sailors were many of them men with Moorish blood in their veins, all right? These are so-called Negro conquistadors. It has been asserted that when the Moors, all right, when the Moors, who's the Moors? When the Moors were driven out of where? Spain and Portugal, right? Thousands took refuge in the south of France. Oh, they didn't just go to North Africa. No, they went to the south of France too, who afterwards, abhorring the Roman Catholic persecutions, became Huguenots, all right, Huguenots. And that of these many emigrated at a later date to South Carolina and Virginia, as we just read. Nicholas Martel, the ancestor of George Washington, right? The Huguenot. He was a Moor. Nicholas Martel was a Moor. Yes, he was a Moor, so-called Huguenot. And he is the earliest American ancestor of George Washington. What does that tell you? He has Moorish blood, right? George Washington has Moorish blood. We're in the book, it says here, George Washington, a biography by Douglas Southall Freeman, Volume 2. This is from 1948. Page 239 of this book, searched by the colonel, and the immersion was to no purpose. The man had disappeared. Loudon had then to attempt to identify Pierre Fidel on the basis of Van Horn's description, added to what the traitor had said casually in his letter of himself and of his military position. What tall, dark officer was there in America, 38 years of age, unmarried, who had eyed the camp and was going to participate in the expedition against Fort Duquesne's? The only officer who was known to Lord Loudon's informants as in any way answering to this description was Colonel Washington, George Washington, who was what tall, dark officer? Tall and dark. Washington. He was single. He had an aide. He was to share in the next march to the Ohio. As it changed, Lord Loudon had close at hand Captain David Kennedy, who had seen Washington in New York in March 1756, when the colonel was returning from the visit to General Shirley in Boston. Loudon consequently asked Kennedy for a description of the Virginian. Right? They're talking about George Washington. Washington said the captain was a man about 6 feet of a black complexion, again, a black complexion with black hair, which he then wore in a bag. Looks like a foreigner, a strong man. Kennedy remembered Washington's companions, Mercer and Stewart, and recalled that Washington's uniform was blue, faced with red and lace, right? Black complexion, so-called black complexions, right? So when they mean dark, they do mean black, so-called black, dark complexion, so-called Negro, right? Remember, he is a descendant of a Huguenot. He does have Moorish blood, so this makes sense, right? So the Huguenot was on his dad's mom's side. On his dad's, the paternal line, the Washington. Now, a lot of people always tell me that Washington originates with Washita. And, I haven't really found anything to really kind of like show me that that's actual, truth. I do know there is a lineage that George Washington comes from on his Washington, family. And the Washington family is an American family, says here, of English origins that was part of both the British landed gentry and the American gentry. It was prominent in colonial America and rose to the great economic and political eminence, especially in the colony of Virginia, as part of the planter class, owning several highly valued plantations, mostly making their money in tobacco farming. Members of the family include the first president. I dodged the hijack, not the first president. All right. This is a future video series I got coming to prove that. And his nephew, Bushrod Washington, who served the Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. The family's root can be traced back to the 12th century in Northeast England, from an 11th century progenitor in Scotland, and emigrated to the New World in the 17th century. John Washington, or we're going to see Washington. So he was the first one to come to the Americas. The ancestral home was Washington Hall, located in the town of Washington, but it was actually Washington. So this is the ancestral home of the Washingtons. Okay, it was actually William de Hartford, first one to take the name. He took possession of the Washington lands from the Bishop of Durham in the late 12th century. And then he changed his name to William de Wessington, as you guys can see here. Wessington later, Washington. And here you got him again, William Fitzpatrick de Washington, or Wessington. All right, Wessington. Here's a coat of arms here, arms of Washington and pedigree of Washington. All right, as you guys can see, this is an actual coat of arms. Washington. GeorgeWashington.org. It says here, George Washington's ancestry points back to England, as did many of the people living in colonial America during his time. His earliest ancestors include several members of the English royalty, the most significant of whom was the great King Charlemagne. More recent evidence of Washington's English heritage are found in Selby Abbey, Yorkshire, England. The Washington family coat of arms was found in some of the stained glass artwork there. This artwork was most likely dedicated to John Washington, a member of an influential family in Durham, England. The name Washington came from the original name of the land that the family first settled in the 12th century. Another name for the Washington family was Washington with quotes. So from Washington to Washington, Washington to Washington, all right? I don't see anything about Washita yet, right? Washita, we already went through the series of the Washita. Okay, we do know that they do have a Washington line, but the line ends in the 1850s, I believe, 40s. So far it hasn't gone back further to link it, but most likely it might come from the same Washingtons or Washingtons of Virginia. So far we got Moorish blood, Huguenot. He's being described as dark complexion and black complexion. We know he has English and Scottish ancestry too. Let's not forget the previous presentations. We've gone over this book, Ancient and Modern Britons. Says here, the anthropological research of Baroka, Turnham and Davis, Huxley, Busk, Virchow, Tobino, and others have proved the existence in Europe of a Neolithic race small of stature with longer oval skulls and accustomed to bury their dead in tombs. Their remains have been found in Belgium and France and Britain, Germany and Denmark, as well as Spain, but they bear closer resemblance to the Basque than to any other living people. This Neolithic race has consequently been identified with the Basque and the Iberians, and extreme exponents of the theory do not hesitate to speak of the Iberian ancestors of the people of England, recognizing the racial characteristics in the small swarthy Welshmen, the small dark Highlanders, and the black Celts to the west of the Shannon. Okay, we've already gone over all this swarthy Europe and its original inhabitants of England and Scotland. All right, that is coming from British landed gentry, and that a progenitor is a Scottish progenitor does not automatically think these are so-called pale skin or white people. So again, there is a Washington family in Europe, and it didn't start with the colonial Washita community that the Maison Rouge established with French families. But I did find something very interesting, all right? And I want to read it to you. It says here in the etymology dictionary, Washington, right? U.S. capital, founded in 1791, named for President George Washington. It says here, the family name is from a town in northeast England, from an Old English, literally estate of a man named Wassa. Wassa or Washa? Wassa or Washa? Maybe. Sounds like it could be Washa too, right? Isn't there a native tribe named Washa? Again, so there is a land called Washington over there in England. Early references appear around 1096 in Old English as Wasindoni. The etymological origin is disputed, and there are several proposed theories on how the name Washington came about. Early interpretations include Wasindoni, people of the hill by the stream, people of the hill by the stream, by the stream, by the creek, by the river, people of the river, or Wasingtona, settlement of Wasa's people. Wasa's people, huh? Wassa. The origins of the name Washington are not fully known. The most supported theory, especially amongst local historians, is that Washington is derived from the Anglo-Saxon Hawasigatun, which roughly means the state of the descendants or family of Hawassa or Hawassa, usually rendered Wassa or Wosa in modern English, is an Old English name meaning wheat chief. So I thought it was interesting, something to look into. Did the Washa tribe of America go to England in medieval times and establish a settlement over there? And that's why it's called, settlement of Wasa's people, settlement of Washa's people. Could be, right? Could be. So we can still leave that open, leave it up there. We're going to investigate that for sure. But, just to be more accurate and historically, there was a Washington family that George Washington descends from, coming from Europe, that can trace back to medieval times. Just want to show you guys again. I'm going to start with Nicholas Martel, the Huguenot, right? Nicholas Martel, the Huguenot, says passenger and immigration list, 1500s, 1900s. Nicholas Martel, a primary immigrant, arrival place, Virginia, 1620. Wow, 1620, right? What are they doing? It says here, the trail of the Huguenots in Europe. The Huguenots in Europe. So George Washington's Moorish ancestor, Huguenot ancestor, and we go down through his daughter Elizabeth Martel, who married George Reed, and they together had Mildred Reed, who married Colonel Warner Jr. The Warners and the Reeds got together, and they had Mildred Warner together, who married Lawrence Washington, who was coming from John Washington and Anne Pope. John was the first one, remember? And then we got Lawrence and their family coming out of England, as it says here, the Sawgrave Manor. That's where their old Wessington house was. So then Lawrence Washington and Mildred Warner, they had Augustine Washington, who got with Mary Ball, and together they had President George Washington, and he married Martha Danbridge. Now we're going to get a description of Martha Danbridge. You guys are going to see what she was physically described as. I'm going to show you that she was also a dark complexion. So on his mom's side, Mary Ball, her dad, Colonel Joseph Matthäus Ball, George Washington's grandfather, and Mary Bennett. Remember the Bennett name? That's a Sephardic Jewish name. Sephardic Jewish name. So now we know through his mom's side, he does have also Sephardic Jewish Moorish blood. Now remember, we've got many references of the original Saxons and Anglo-Saxons also being of dark complexion. Many of them described as swarthy, dark men. It says here, origin of the Anglo-Saxon race, because they're saying Wassa or Washington was named by the Anglo-Saxons. And, they're saying the Washingtons or Washingtons go back to, English, Anglo-Saxon blood. So Anglo-Saxon, again, doesn't mean white. I want to show you guys. The counties of Hereford and Buckingham have people as dark as Wales, as dark as Wales. So the Welsh, remember the Welsh? We just got it in that book we read earlier, Ancient Modern Britons. It said the dark Welsh, right? Just like the dark Welsh, right? In England, all investigation goes to show that this brunette outcrop is a reality. Brunette, brown, dark complexion, brunette outcrop is a reality. Continue further down, it says, there is in addition evidence that points to Norwegians of a brunette appearance. As another source, whence brown complexion people may have come into England, all right, on the southeast coast of Norway, and here they are on the coast farther north, a population is met with, which differs from the usual Norwegian type. And this has been referred by anthropologists to a very ancient settlement there of the prehistoric brown race that survives in the highlands of Central Europe. Again, going always to the highlands. Shout out to my boy Rob from Texas, pointed that out. All right, always to the highlands, right? High places of Central Europe, and is known as the brown alpine race. The brown alpine race. Listen, okay, listen. Says here the consideration of the evidence that people of brunette complexions were among the Anglo-Saxon settlers in England leads to that of people of a still darker hue, the dark black or brown black settlers, okay? Anglo-Saxons who are black, okay? Anglo-Saxons. Probably there must have been some of these among the Anglo-Saxons, for we meet with the personal names Blackman, Blackman, Blackerman, Blackaman, Blacksunu, Blacka, and Blackman in various documents of the period. Okay, Anglo-Saxons. Continue a little bit ahead. It says the invasion of the coast of the British Isles by Vikings of a dark or black complexion rests on historical evidence which is too circumstantial to admit of doubt. In the Irish annals of the Black Vikings are called Dub Genti or Black Gentile. All right, so we got Black Vikings too going into England. So remember, all this information I just read to you guys, this is from previous videos I've shown you. Check out my Swarthy European videos. All right, just in case you guys don't agree with the brunette, it says here in the American Dictionary of the English Language, Webster's 1828 version, Noah Webster's Dictionary, says here brunette, a woman with a brown or dark complexion. All right, brunette means dark complexion, dark complexion. Funny they say woman here because we're about to go read something about George Washington's wife, Martha. Says here Mary and Martha, the mother and the wife of George Washington by Benson J. Lawson, LLD. This is from 1886, and we're at page 119, and it says here, that sweet young woman, the dark lady, as she was called because of the deep brunette of her complexion, because of the deep dark complexion. They're talking about Miss Washington. It says here, from the beginning of her residence at Mount Vernon, Miss Washington was greatly beloved because of her abundant charities. All right, so when they go down here, she was referenced as the dark lady. A little further down here, it says he was especially tender towards her only surviving daughter, the gentle Martha Park Custis, the dark lady of Mount Vernon, whom he loved as his own child. All right, they're talking about one of the daughters of Martha, his wife, and a stepdaughter of George Washington, who was also referred to as the dark lady. All right, continuing with George Washington again. So we got, he has Moorish blood. We know the Welsh, the English, a lot of the Scottish, the Anglo-Saxons. A lot of these people were Negro as well. So it's conjecture to say, he's white, half white or half Moorish, because, that side also is contested. He's already been described as black and dark already. We got his wife being called the dark lady. You guys starting to see the trend? It says here, history of the George Washington Bicentennial Celebration, Volume 1. This is from 1932. We're on page 225, Youth and Manhood of George Washington. It says here, the man himself, okay? Contemporaries of George Washington have commented that none of his portraits accurately resembled him. They don't resemble him. And a member of his immediate family is quoted as having said that picture of him painted by various artists all look very much alike, but are not really like the general himself. Do you see what they're telling you here? Who is that painting of these body snatchers, whitewashed images? This is attributed to the fact that the expression of George Washington's face varied according to circumstances and the painter's side only in repose, right? So it's not him. His family members and all the people contemporary to his time are not describing him like that. A great similarity exists also in the word pictures penned by those who met George Washington at different periods of his life and under varying circumstances. One of the earliest of these depicts a handsome youth of 19, full height of 6 feet 2 inches, slender, blue eyes, an abundance of brown hair, and a clear, ruddy complexion. That does not mean white, so-called pale skin, or white man. That's the dodge the hijack. Ruddy, copper brown, reddish brown, copper, ruddy complexion. His manner, self-control, his speech well considered. Okay, he's ruddy. All those paintings of him are not him. They are not really like him. They don't resemble him. I just want to show you guys, when you put ruddy animals on Google, you can do it yourself. This is what you're going to get. This is what you're going to get. You're going to get this. Look at this cutie right here. This is what you're going to get. This is a ruddy dog. As it says here, ruddy, right? A ruddy duck, right? Ruddy duck, ruddy. Look at that brown. Look at that rich brown, ruddy. So you guys can see, if you put ruddy, you're going to get all kinds of shades of brown, reddish brown, ruddy. They're not talking about somebody who got pale skin and red cheeks. No, this is ruddy, brownish, rich color, ruddy. All right, ruddy. As you guys can see, this is the ruddy mongoose. As you guys can see, brownish, ruddy. So I think you guys get the point. Ruddy does not mean a white person, especially in colonial times. And the people writing in his times, contemporaries, are describing him with ruddy complexion, dark complexion, black complexion. We know he has Moorish blood. We know Anglo-Saxons, Welsh, English. These were originally dark-skinned people. We know he has Sephardic Jewish blood as well. And they're telling us in this scholarly source that the paintings do not depict him. That's not him. And we're in the book here, George Washington, a biography. And this is by John R. Alden. And I'm on page 11 of this book. So they're going to describe George Washington in this book here. Says he had property, he had prospects, and he was physically attractive, 6 feet tall. He was lanky, like many other Americans, like Jefferson and Lincoln. All right, just like Lincoln. Remember what Lincoln looked like? All right. He had rather long and lean arms and thighs, and he was flat-chested. He had strong but quite regular features, except that the upper part of his nose was unusually broad. All right, unusually broad nose. His face, like so many countenances of his time, exhibited the marks of smallpox. He had light blue eyes, all right, light blue eyes and brown hair, and was a vigorous male. A British officer who met Washington some years later reported that he had a dark complexion and a foreign look, a dark complexion and a foreign look. That's George Washington, okay? So break the spell, you guys see? All right, he has Moorish blood. He's being described as being a so-called dark-skinned complexion man, and by his contemporaries, primary sources, as it says here, dark complexion man, so swarthy. Can I get so swarthy George Washington from the Washington Anglo-Saxon Scottish line? So again, we got the Washington line here going all the way down to George, right, and Martha right here. So it says here with the X. This is his family line. His dad Augustine and his mom married Ball. So this is one line, and again, his mom's line, the Ball family, as we can see here. Crest of Joseph Ball, Washington's grandfather. William Ball, Lord of Manor of Barkham. This goes all the way back to 1480. All right, Robert Ball, William Ball, and it goes all the way down to Mary Ball right here, mother of Washington. So now that we have a more clearer perspective of the Washingtons, or the Wessingtons, as it says here, the Washingtons of Wessington Plantation. Yeah, so there's a whole book on that. And you know how they're saying they got their name from their slave master and they're from Africa and all that. So we got to dodge the hijack big time, because the Wessingtons or the Washingtons were so-called Negroes. All right. And it says here, descendant of Wessington. We already got the drop on them. The Wessington slave, John F. Baker Jr., has written the most accessible and exciting work of African American history since Roots. Since Roots, remember, Roots was a fictional story. Alex Haley got sued. He had to admit he made it all up. So you see what they're using here? Just like Roots, we're making it up too. Just like Roots, we're making it up too. Founded in 1796 by Joseph Washington, a distant cousin of America's first president. Washington Plantation covered 15,000 acres. All right, a cousin of Washington was a so-called dark complexion, ruddy, swarthy, black man. Moorish blood, Sephardic, Jewish, Anglo. So you guys already see. So we got to really think about these things, all right? When we're doing genealogy and we're hearing these slave narratives, and we're talking about we got our last name from a white ancestor named Washington or Wessington. You know, you got to really think about that. As it says here, because Washington had a dark complexion, dark complexion. Hope you guys enjoyed this presentation. Much love and respect. Thanks for tuning in. I got a lot more videos coming. I just wanted to get this one out the way. Shout out to the YouTube channels, Neophyte Dad and Straight Up. They do great research. And all the rest of the good researchers out there, Drop Nation and everybody else doing all the work, putting it in all the long hours to help us in this journey so we can build together and grow and learn as a community. So now you know George Washington was a
All right, just with that being said, I guess if he had a swarthy or ruddy complexion, um, that's not a good enough reason, or would it be a good enough reason to do what they did with Moses, Aaron, Jacob, um, Judah, and all the other individuals? If he did have a dark complexion and was of the Negro descent, then basically, why would America change the way that he looks and depict you or have you looking at a white man as the first president, when in all actuality that the first president could have been Swarthy? With that, I say shalom alaikum to you all. Most definitely stay prayed. Remember to stay prayed up, and remember to say your Shema. I'm not going to say it right now because I have my head covered. So basically, I don't feel like taking my wrap off or my cap off in order to recite the Shema at the moment. I've done that when I first got up. Do it at 12 o'clock, and then do it sometimes between right before I go to sleep and right before, or it's at this particular time. It's not a set time, but right before I go to sleep, and at 3 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes when my alarm goes off, if I have already set it, I won't say the Shema again. But in all, I hope everyone has a blessed day. Stay prayed up. Thank Yahweh for giving me the opportunity to present this information to Mishpacha, my family, and most definitely give me more edification or more discernment and more information to pour into me as far as what I'm able to receive and actually give back to your people. But like I said before, T'ada Rabba Yahweh, Bahashem HaMashiach, Yahweh Shah, Uvein Barakata, Sirech, Ruach HaKadesh. Stay blessed, stay prayed up. One.